Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 66. This session is covering the broad range of numerology in different cultural, mythic, and spiritual traditions. When I say broad, that's exactly what I mean. There are certain topics, certain numbers where this session will go more heavily in, and then there are others that it glosses over quite quickly. So, by no means is this a thorough investigation, but for anybody who's ever entertained the wormhole of numerology in, say, Christianity or in, say, the ancient Babylon, so on and so forth, you'll realize that this is a horrible wormhole. Um, and my job here is to, one, give an introduction, and two, show the human psychology of this whole operation, this projection of meaning into number as it translates and mistranslates across time. So when I say numerology, it's a bit of a ham-fisted term because numerology would be defined as the use of numbers to interpret a person's character or divine the future. And that's not what I'm focusing on. We've spent more than enough time on divination in the course. However, there is this other aspect of numerology which isn't the classic definition, but still yet, I guess you should say, number symbolism in religious tradition, which goes in many ways to Pythagoreanism. All things can be expressed through number, as is the kind of mantra. So everything, including personality, motion, metaphysics, I mean, you name it. Not just simply the scientific kind of mentality, phenomena where, every time my blood pumps, it's moving a certain mile per hour, right? Or every sort of iota of chemical orchestrating itself through my physiology, equating itself through number into emotion. Even greater than that, to say that everything is number. Everything is number. Every influence from every direction, every dimension of your person, every metaphysical and philosophical sentiment, all are number. And so, with the Greeks and, of course, with Hebrew, both in which cases their alphabets represent a sort of numerology. Again, not the best term, but the letters are numbers. They are numerical as well and can be used for coding. And in which case, the most famous is the Hebrew gematria. There is also this other term, arithmomancy, which is obvious, somewhat arithmos being number, and mancy always denoting divination. So the Greeks, the Chaldeans, and Hebrew are usually the ones accredited with this sort of mancy, with this divination through number, which could be the progenitors of this modern numerology, where if you want, just do a quick search online, see what your name and your birthday, what numbers it gives, and be your own judge as to the matter. I guess it's just as good as taking on a strength finder personality test, or saying that I'm like an INFP or something. Anyway, and here's a reference that was made long ago in the course. It's just to say that 30,000 years ago, we can find excavation of carvings on bone that seem to be depicting moon phases. And so in which case already 13 would have a poignant, purposeful meaning within as a number to this ancient humankind. And then, of course, we move to the Babylonians. And then, so that now the planets are numbered, right? And now the number of planets would hold a significance, okay? So if they're counting them, then they're like, wow, there must be something about that number. And using those numbers to predict eclipses, to predict flooding, to predict all manner of astronomical phenomena, and to later understand the precession of the equinoxes and so forth. Ancient Egypt would do much in the same. And then, of course, that moves to Pythagoras, and he runs with it. He runs all headfirst into it, to say that there are distinct frequencies emitted by the spherical celestial bodies in the heavens that are these kind of archetypal resonances that ought to be emulated in every way possible. And then, wham bam, you've got the Bible, and it's like, 666, this is a bad thing. And then, so on and so forth. Number. People nowadays, you get a receipt, and it's $6.66. Oh no, I gotta buy something new. Or, if you get dealt a number on your plane ticket and it says 13, and it's like, oh no, I gotta pay to change that. This taboo, right, is innate to every culture in some form. And mathematically speaking, outside of taboo, right, then numbers do have signification. They do. There are perfect numbers and so on and so forth, semi-perfect numbers. There are sequences, like the Fibonacci, of course, the golden ratio. There is something to say about like when that number pops up, pi, so forth. And in which case the significance of the fact that these numbers have an effect in the innate nature of the architecture of the cosmos is the sort of reality that substantiates Freemasonry or substantiates the intrigue in Mozart's music, or endless examples. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this arithmomancy, and in which case then there are these very gaudy statements to come out with. Jesus's numerical value is 888, quite an auspicious number. Or in the Old Testament, there are two words, Old Testament. The three letters come out. The three letters of the first word, 9 in the second. 3 and 9. Old Testament. 39. Number of books in the Old Testament. Wow. Okay. Is that intentional? Again, three letters. Old. 9. Testament. 3 times 9, or 3 9 equals number of Old Testament books. Then you have the New Testament. 3 9. New Testament. 3 times 9, instead of putting them together. 27. Number of books in the New Testament. Is this something, right? This is that head scratcher territory. Why is Methuselah said to have lived 969 years? Why did John precisely number the fish that were caught in the unbroken net? The sum of the cubes of its digits. He says 153. 1 to the power of 3, 5 to the power of 3, and 3 to the power of 3 equals 153. So is this just simply a kind of showing of significance, that this is a significant mathematical number, like literally in mathematics, not in some symbolism, and to use that number to represent a sort of perfection? So if you did your math correctly earlier, then you would know that there are 66 books in the Bible, which is a little interesting. So usually, though, that's not an okay number, and by Christian standards, that's 3, 7, 10, and 12 are the good numbers, right? Of all the numbers that we can count, those ones are the good ones. And the bad ones, those are 6, 13, and 40, which are bad for different reasons, of which we'll touch on some throughout all this. I'm giving an introduction right now. But it's interesting to note that while this has such intrigue and such lip service given to it within the Bible, to say that you're studying numerology comes with, you know, at least an eyebrow raise to the Christian community. They would not endorse the arithmomancy or the numerology. I mean, that would be leaning into the kind of Satan stuff, right? So it's strange, this contradiction of terms. But it is to say that the writers of this material were intrigued by this, or did feel the need to be exact. So in which case it means that the writers intended for something to be found there, or were giving some sort of historical token that we've lost the codex for. But we should pay attention to the grander scheme here. So this ancient Mesopotamian counting system, which gives us the trope of the 5-year increments, 5-year, 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 right? To count for them, it was to count in 60 months that would equal 5-year cycle. And so we have this trope, right, of everything's in fives, you know, meet me there at 5:45, right? We don't say 5:43, 5:49. That's not okay. It has to be in fives, which really, it just comes down to the hand. I mean, look at your hand. That is why it's 5, unless you're missing a finger, in which case that's insensitive. But 5, why is that the innate, right? And that gives us the precondition for counting things off in 5s and 10s. Anyway, so this trope that I'm talking about, though, is ridiculously OP. And what I mean is humans use number for everything. What's the distance between me and you? Be it kilometers, be it miles. Number, right? How fast do I need to go? How fast am I going? How fast was I? Wait, I wasn't going that fast, officer. Number. How hot is it today? Number. How old are you? Give me the number. How rich, right? What is my financial statements? What does it look like? Give me the number. Your worth. From a fiscal, standpoint, and from a reputational, oftentimes, depending on what circles you operate in, weighs on the number. How many people live in your city? What were the sports statistics like? What is the computation, right? What is the qualitative and quantitative metric of this scientific experiment? Music has numerical notation. And so, by virtue of this meat and potatoes to all things life that number is, obviously there's going to be a kind of meme that will blossom up out of a culture to say that this one is the one that we like, and this is the one that's like, nah. And so, this boils out, right? It could be superstition. There could be metaphysical attributes ascribed to the number. There could be heavy religious associations with number. And we just take it for granted. I mean, we just assume everybody thinks about these numbers the way we do. We were indoctrinated in this way. So when we see it contradicted, that seems strange to us. And it just shows the nebulous and arbitrary nature of this kind of enterprise. I mean, your misfortune could be dictated by a number that you're given, or your fortune, right? Like, I like that number, and I got that number on the lotto, right? So that means I'm going to get the lotto, or that means I'm going to win the bet, right? You measure things, the quantification, the historical record, to say that it happened on this date. That date has associations, thus the number has association. So it's just to say that we get a lot from numbers, whether we are following a tradition or not. We have so much meaning packed into each and every one of them in different kind of ways. So as I said before, we have formed already in this talk a kind of historical basis, right? This kind of lineage into the ancient times of counting the moon cycles, into the approach of the counting the stars in the heaven and ascribing names and number to them, and using it for divination, moving on to simply just using it for quantification of next to everything in the modern existence. But I want to point out like a few interesting idiosyncrasies before we get to the real meat and potatoes of this whole talk, and this is just an instance where, say, for instance, the Yoruba people will not count, and this is very traditional. The traditional Yoruba numeracy would have it that they do not count their children, that it is viewed as a bad omen to name or to count your children, and there are different reasons for this taboo. And another example are the Zulu, and in which case there is a distinct order for how you count. You start on your left hand at the pinky, and then you move inward. And then you do the same but reverse on your other hand. There is an etiquette to how you count, and the name for the number is related or the same as the name of the finger that you're counting, that you would count on. So there already I point these two examples out to kind of show just examples of not necessarily the association with certain numbers, but how these odd little things can be changed culturally in our understanding of number and our approach to number. So these influences are not ubiquitous. The only thing that is ubiquitous about it is that there is an influence around it. I mean, Western society, right? Typically, what people expect is that you're starting with your pointer finger when you start counting, and then you move outward, right? Something as simple as that. Anyway, let's I feel like I could go off the sides. Let's get distinct. We're going to count. We're going to count 0 to 12. We're going to talk about each of them to varying degrees, and do some extra mentions after the fact. But 0 has an interesting history about it, of course, and usually is ascribed to Persian mathematicians. However, there has been recent evidence to show that it was in fact already discussed, if not put down completely, by India prior to the Persian integration. So this idea of 0 too comes with a host of meaning, and very, very notably to Hinduism, of which we are going to bring up throughout this quite a bit, honestly. 0. Because if the ultimate kind of eschatology, the ultimate seeking of the practitioner of Hinduism or Buddhism for that matter, would be to achieve moksha, or would be to become Atman, or to join Brahman, right? And so in which case you're not seeking to become one, right? Because one is not Atman. That one would be in this system, being self. Self is one. That's one. You want to be 0. You want to be everything and nothing. 0, as it is a neutralizer of everything. Anything times 0 equals 0, right? Describing the prime being is 0. Perfection and intelligibility. Absolute 0. which is an interesting metric as we've come to use it. I mean, but in this way of symbolism, right out the gates, we're getting very haughty. I guess just symbolism is the best way of putting it. Meaning, purpose. But anyhow, let's move to one. One, as it is traditionally understood, is unity, which often symbolizes God, which again, already we're seeing the difference, right? Because Brahman is the all, right? That was zero in one system of thinking. And now we have God represented as one. One is the symbol of unity. Everything is one. We are all one, right? Very, very psychedelic kind of statement there. However, to disagree with this again, the Pythagoreans didn't consider one to be a number, because number to them means many, plurality, whereas one is not many. One is individual. One is singular. The source of all numbers is one. So if it's not normal, right, it shows, because if you add 1 to an odd number, it becomes even. And if you add 1 to an even number, it becomes odd. One is this kind of mixer in that way, not masculine and not feminine by this conception. So, if anything, you might say, well, that is an extension of God. You know, you could ascertain meaning through how one functions in these different ways as the characteristics of God, if you want to ascribe that meaning to the number, of course. But in another way, we could look at different versions of Hinduism, which I should state, you know, I'm bringing up Hinduism a lot, but in truth, Hinduism is so broad, and there's so many different ways of thinking. There's so many sects and denominations. Denominations isn't the best word, but just to say that in a different way, one has represented, you know, this place, meaning the one earth, the one home. One is the earth itself, the place that springs spirituality, literature, and folklore. One is the earth, and this is where we are all one, because we are of it. And then, of course, you know, if we look over at Islam, then we're going to see that it's not very different. Allah is one. And so when one is, you know, coined, there it is, very plain and simple. The emphasis on this is because of the polytheistic history of the region, right? So the polytheistic history of, say, the Levant, or say of the greater Middle East, to emphasize that God is one, right, is to show the simplification, the relief of distress, the simplification of this approach to the divine. And, you know, to assert this belief has historical resonance. Okay, number 2, dualities. This is the splitting, the fracturing, which, by the way, I've been very intentful to not include any Kabbalism into all this. Anyway, the dualities are everywhere, right? Should I be here or should I go away? Is it left or is it right? Should I be living or should I be dead? Am I, you know, is it me or is it you? Is it yes or is it no? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it yin? Is it yang? These dualities, two as it is dual. There was one and then there was two, right? And the kind of natural spectrum that forms from this progression to two. And already you can see, isn't that alone, even just thinking about mathematically and the possibilities, isn't it already kind of beautiful, this kind of symbolism of creation as we've moved from just simply 0 to 2. And you can see that purpose, the meaning that seems so naturally involved in it, has a lot of room to be projected into. Anyway, so we have these dualities, and then, here come the Pythagoreans again, and they ascribe the number 2 to female. Female's number 2. And then other numerological traditions think that number 2 is male. So, there's a kind of classic thing. I mean, in this language, the chair is female. And in this language, the chair is male. Number 2, in occult traditions, by like Agrippa, for example, is the symbol for man. And subsequently, and by extension, is the symbol for evil and sex. Which that does, at least the sex thing makes a bit more sense, It takes two to tango, as they say. Genesis does not like 2. And that's just to say that as Genesis is rattling off the days of which things were created, the second day, it doesn't specifically say, and it was good. Unlike it does with the other days. And so since it didn't specify that what was happening on that second day was good, that means it was bad, I guess. We could read a lot into that. In Sanskrit, talking of Hinduism again, 2 is associated with the word for eye. And when I say eye, I mean like those things that you see with. And in which case, 2 eyes, right? 2 as a word that is related to the word eye, or exactly as, I don't know, I don't speak it. My sources say so. And so in which case, yet again, we see the example like we did with the Zulu, where the number counted is associated with a physical body part that is associated with the counting of that number. Of course, next is 3. And 3, we've made a bit of a meme throughout the course before, because 3 would become ubiquitous with spiritual traditions. And by no means am I going to touch on all of them, but in Hinduism, you have 1, say eternal being out of the Brahman, right? Creation is 2. Creation couldn't come to be unless duality came to be, right? And then comes 3, which is the rhythmic organization, the kind of completion of all the factors that would span out for the rest of it, right? 3 was where it all opened up. And this is the Tridevi, or the Trimirti, but the 3 as it is the kind of archetypal framework for the universe, right? The 3 deities, the 3 that keep it together, which this really has a number of implications. I mean, we have in Egypt, you have Khepri, rising, you have Ra, midday, and you have Atum, which is the setting. The 3, you could say in a certain way of thinking that there are the 3 phases of the moon. You have, then again, in Babylon, you have Baal, Ea, and Anu, heaven, earth, and the abyss. You have the 3 Billy Goats Gruff. You have the 3 Little Pigs. You have 3 guesses and only 3 guesses. You have the 3 bears with their cute porridge. In French, we have this expression, je m'en descends trio, or no, trois, which is never 2 without 3, signifying how things happen in 3s, right? So this case in the French expression is more to the bad things happen in 3s. And in a more kind of English colloquialism, idiom, good things happen in 3s as a saying. And why? Right? Why 3s? And in which case it seems that we as humans are reacting to this objective phenomena that things do happen in threes. Fool me once, and when you fool me twice, blah blah blah, right? It's three. And then, obviously there is the Christian Trinity for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But that trope of three goes way, way back and is way, way spread across the world, right? And so then here we can see why Pythagoras and by extension Plato have this obsessive quality with the triangle. It is three. And by virtue of three having this kind of effect, objectively throughout, like, just the lived experience, the phenomenology of existence, the triangle, the pyramid, would be of great fascination to see what you could unveil about the nature of the world by its observation. And then, when it comes to religious traditions, again, in Islam, of course, three is a big deal. When it comes to these rituals, as salah or wudu, I don't know if I'm saying those correctly, prayer, ablution, to wash their faces, arms, and feet with water 3 times, each of those things 3 times, to recite verses 3 times while bowing. This is also done in Christianity with the Holy Trinity. This because allegedly that Jesus took 3 days to come back, right? Of course he would take 3 days to come back. In the prayer, it's in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen. 3 motions with 3 fingers traditionally done. Not the beginning or end of how far that one goes. But we're moving on to 4. And the number 4 has this significance in greater margin to the native traditions. But not just there, because if we're simply talking about the elements, then it is traditionally 4. Earth, air, fire, water. Then there are the 4 points of the compass and the 4 phases. See, and this is the other understanding. There are 4 phases of the moon. See, again, it just depends on who we're asking about, what number is ascribed to what. But in this understanding, there's half moon waning, there's full, there's half moon waxing, and there's new. There's the 4 noble truths in Buddhism, just as an extension. We have the idea of the humors in the ancient kind of medicinal or anatomical understanding. That's black bile, blood, phlegm, and is that choler or choler? I haven't came across that one. Oh, choleric. Yeah, choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic. Yes, the 4 humors. And in the Sioux tradition, of course, this extends greatly out to the natives as well. You have the 4 groups of gods, which are the superior, the ally, the subordinate, and the spirit. Those are the different groups. You have the different understanding of the cycles of humanity, that is, infant, child, maturity, and the elderly. And then you have the types of creatures, the animals being the creeping, the flying, the 4-legged, and the 2-legged. These as different categories, right? And to the Pythagoreans, you have also the tetractys, which is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. This is why it represents 10 later on will represent the perfect number, but the 4 is the source of the tetractys. To go back to the natives, that is a classic trope. This idea of the 4 directions. As you pray and as you begin a ceremony, you call in the directions, and that is 4. And each has their own distinctive color for different reasons, depending. When it comes to certain ceremonies, they are usually organized in stages of 4 accordingly, since that is the sacred number. There are also some groups that feel that there are 4 human races, 4 different skin tones that denote the 4 races of humankind. Subsequently, by also this extension of humanity's, birth to youth to adult to death, or the different orders that always are 4, there's also the seasons that mirror the spring, the summer, the winter, the fall. And then when it comes to your well-being, by extension, there is the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. Already mentioned the elements accordingly, as it is also very significant to the natives. And then you also have the very significant animals that are held as sacred. And again, these are just very distinct cultures. I'm not naming all the names. I'm moving very quickly. But in this case, it would be eagle, bear, wolf, and buffalo. That would be true for some, but not true for all. We would include other animals if it were different groups, right? You have the different ceremonial plants, which are more ubiquitous, in which case tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, cedar, the medicine wheel, also included in all that I've mentioned. This is the trick, though, and I've mentioned this before in the course, is that as soon as we look elsewhere, right? Because we have all these examples of where 4 is significant, right? And we can substantiate that with lived experience and an observation of genuine phenomena. And then we move to China. In China, the word for 4 is a homophone for the word for death. And so right there, we have a taboo. That 4 is not a good deal. And this is where you would omit that floor on the elevator kind of vibes. It was that sort of thing earlier where I was talking about you get a receipt and it says 666 on it, right? Or 13 or whatever. Like, this is the number to avoid in China. So, buildings omit it. People try to not have it appear on their documents or their license plates. If you are admitted to a hospital and you are sent to room 4, no, right? And that's cultural, and it's obvious based off the language that is your everyday language, right? And the only thing that kind of brings this in different with another culture is there is, of course, the case in Revelations where there are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So mixed bag there. So moving on. 5. The sum of the first even and odd numbers to the Pythagoreans. 2 plus 3 is 5. So again, 1 isn't a number to them. So thus 2 plus 3 is 5. The first sum of the first odd and even number. This is human life. To add the first odd and even is the number for human life. And in which case, it also would hold significance for the Pythagoreans. So the 5 discovered regular solids. The octahedron, the dodecahedron, the isohedron, the tetrahedron, and the cube. There were earlier communities, too, that only believed in 4, so once they discovered the 5th, it was actually quite the, Anyway. The other associations with 5 is that it's somehow exotic, and it's somehow rebellious. And this may have a lot to do with the association with the number 5 with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. And that moves forward. That moves forward to Venus. And this is the reference to the 5-pointed star, which is the pentagram. And here we go. Here we go. All the flood of meanings that come in as soon as I say pentagram, right? In Manichaeanism, this is the first man having 5 sons. And this is because there are 5 elements, add aether, and there we go. And in which case, by extension, the 5 elements of light, which are ether, wind, water, light, and fire. And the 5 forms of darkness. And this is further substantiated by the 5 parts of the human body, the 5 virtues and the 5 vices. Now, when I say 5 parts of the human body, this is where you look at Da Vinci's, picture of the man. And that is that the limbs, the standard limbs, right? 2 legs, 2 arms, and count the head. 5 parts, right? And the central body is just connective tissue in this kind of mentality. So we are the pentagram. We are the pentagram. And also this association with love, so strangely, right? I don't know if it's still done in modern England, but I know it used to be done where the lover's knot was tied in such a way 5 times over to show lovers, right? The lover's knot to show romantic sentiment was to, show this knot, which is 5. The Mayans also held significance for the number because it was the center number of the compass, right? So if you have the 4 directions, you are 5 because you are in the middle of those directions. You are the observer of those directions. You are 5, which is why the elements are so significant and why we add the number 5 to Aether for elements, because Aether is spirit. It's the self. And so in which case there are the 4 elements and you are 5 and you have 5 fingers to show you that, right? Here we go. And so that's part of the mystery. When we start to bring signification and just to ask why, right? And you could say it's simply anatomical, right? There's a certain functionality to the 5 fingers that we should have, the 5 toes that we should have. And then, to further blow it out as we're like looking into this, to observe that this body by the Vesuvian man, right, is a 5 extremities, the head, the arms, the legs. And so it's that extra element, that thing that moves beyond what was viewed as already the natural cycle. Again, the extra element, the thing that seems like an addition. Us, right? To think of like the simplicity that we project on the natural world as it would have been if we had not come into being, right? That it would all be quite easy, quite simple. And then here we come, this 5th essence, right? This quintessence that just gets thrown in the mix and that really gets the entropy going. And this is all related to that pentagram thing again too. It's central or viewed as central to occultism. And really that warrants its own investigation. This trope. And I think it's just more of that than anything. It was a trope, a kind of idea that caught on to use the pentagram. If it represents us, it represents our will. And our will, as it is like made an iconography at the beginning of a ceremony to conjure something for our own intention. Thus the pentagram. We are the pentagram. But to take it out of that, in Islam, 5 is sacred. There are 5 pillars of Islam. Prayers, in depending on traditions, are said 5 times every day, and then 3 times over. There is the idea in Islam of the 5 prophets. You had Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, right? 5 prophets overall. And just to further substantiate that love interpretation, we also have the Sanskrit word for arrow, which denotes 5, which is associated with the deity of love. And so in which case it's carrying 5 arrows of flowers. So this, these tropes are very intermixed, right? We could say that the association with love ultimately came from Hinduism into Proto-Indo-European, and in which case became this association that would move to Babylon and would ultimately end up in Rome. And there's that, right? Okay, anyway. 6. 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. The first three numbers equal 6. Thus, in mathematical terms, it is perfect. A perfect number is one that equals the sum of its divisors. And the next one up would be 28. So, this is the first perfection, you see, mathematically speaking. And then we go to the story of Genesis, and we see that it took 6 days for creation to happen. 6. And then God rests on the 7th. So, this idea of 6 being bad, just in Christian terms already, is quite strange, because creation took 6 days. Isn't that good? But the 7th day is extra special because that's the day of rest. So that's the one, I guess, that gets the glory there, even though it could have just as easily been 6. But anyway, it's perfectly logical to see mathematically, if we were people that were choosing to make the Bible in a certain way, then it would seem to make perfect symbolic sense to make it done in 6 days. It's creation's perfect 6, right? Anyway, resting on the 7th. Day 1, light is created. Day 2, day 1, light is created. On day 2 and 3, the heavens and earth appear. And finally, on days 4, 5, and 6, all the creatures are created. 6 in the Chinese tradition sounds like the word luck, or actually no, it sounds like the word smooth. It means smooth. It's considered lucky. Smooth and flow. Everything will go smoothly. Lulu Dao Shan, I think is how it's said. I mean, I shouldn't try to pronounce that. Anyway, 6 is the number preferred when it comes to addresses, right? And so, unlike before, 4 would be so avoided. But if you can get a house with 6, that's pretty good. I mean, that's going smooth, right? But then you have the Judeo-Christian thing coming up where it's like, oh, this is the devil. It's bad. But 6 isn't the best number for the Chinese, but we'll get to that later. So we're moving through that one quickly, because 7 is going to take up a lot of time. And 7 gets a lot of attention. This is existence. The internalized world, if we're talking Hinduism, is 7, because there are 7 chakras. There are 7 different realms, levels of awareness in the consciousness. There are 7 places to travel to for pilgrimage. Depending on what sects in Hinduism we're talking about, there are 7 great rishis or monks. 7 already in the ancient progenitor of most modern Western religions, that is Hinduism, has great significance in Hinduism. So thus we can see how it will fan out, right? The sum of 3, which is spiritual, and the sum of 4, which is viewed as material, is 7. So when we have the ancient education, the ancient university, we have the trivium and the quadrivium. If you put these together, it's 7. These 7 subjects, the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the quadrivium, music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, that is your full education, and that is what liberal arts meant. Those were the liberal arts. You can see how much it's changed. I would love to go to school for the liberal arts. Anyway, given that 7 already is privileged, you can see how the Pythagoreans would really grab on. 7 distinct notes on the musical scale for them, right? The 8th note is exceeding the harmonious, which is why it's called octave. Octave. 7 has historically in Western society been understood as lucky and mysterious. there's an elusive, enigmatic, or mystique quality. It's a prime number, right? So there are 7 days of the week. We've gone through that several times throughout the course. That as it relates to the idea of the seven spheres, the seven celestial spheres, the wandering bodies in the sky. There is a certain interpretation, of that being the reason behind the 7 candles of the Jewish menorah. That's the 7 planets of antiquity. In ancient Egypt, you have the 7 heavenly cows, you have the 7 paths to heaven, 7 minutes in heaven. Osiris leads you through the 7 halls of the underworld. The Christians believe in the 7 deadly sins. See, what a flip on that one. You have the cult of Mithras popping up yet again. Central movements to your soul's progression in moving through the 7 planetary spheres. Your initiation was 7 because of the planetary spheres. The Rosicrucians also would use this. Significant in all manner of Abrahamic traditions, right? And so in that case, you'd really think that it has to go to Judaism. Judaism has to be the source. And where Judaism, when it comes to 7, the word 7 means luck. Luck equals 7 in gematria. 77 is mazal, and it equals good luck, right? So 7 just already was favored by the culture. But there's all these contradictions. For instance, if you break a mirror, that's 7 years of bad luck. In Celtic culture, you'd say that a cat has 9 lives, but in Iran, it's 7. Cat has 7 lives. The Vedas are 3 and 7. Like the numbers that are reoccurringly used are 3 and 7. So already, it's a spiritual tradition. So those are the numbers that are going to get used. So that's worthy of pointing out. The god Agni, which is a kind of primordial deity that lost favor as Hinduism aged a bit. It's still featured, though. The god of fire. 7 wives, mothers, sisters, and produces 7 flames. All 7. The sun god has 7 horses on the chariot. In the Rig Veda, there are 7 parts of the world, 7 seasons, and 7 heavenly fortresses. The cow has 21, which is the cow has 21 names, and in which case it's 3 times 7. So the cow is extra spiritual. And is it that simple though? That these numbers just have this trope of meaning, and so thus you exponentiate it by its use, to make your point. There are, Hippocratically speaking, there is the 7 illnesses of the body, and typically when it comes to treatments, the doctor would say that you will be healed in either 21, 14, or 7 days. That everything moves in that kind of cycle. And if you think about it, right, we use weeks to determine longer spans of time. So this happened in 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks. But instead, we're distinguishing 21 days as it is appropriate by the religious, spiritual significance of 7. And this is true when we look at all manner of magic traditions. In Jewish magic, much of the recipes are going to be using 7 of something. And to a ridiculous degree, you'd come up with a concoction that would have 7 of 7 different things to come up with the cure. Oh, man. In the first chapter of the Quran, it is composed of 7 verses. Hell is thought of as having 7 doors. In the holy pilgrimage, they must circle Kaaba, I don't know if I'm saying that right, 7 times. I mean, again, numbers seem very, very specific, right? The ritual of stoning the devil is to throw 7 small stones, striking the 3 pillars. In ancient numerology, 7 was thought of as perfect, and thus the 7 days. The 7 days are symbolic. So 6 was the perfect number, but in ancient societies they believed it was 7. So to have the resting on the 7th but created in 6 is kind of a nod that appeases all. So it says that, God made the 7th day holy because it was an anticipation of the 4th commandment, which is interesting. Right? 3 plus 4. Anyway, we are going to talk about the Chinese end of this as well. 7, meaning vital energy or complete. Again, romantic luck is the association with this one. So unlike the West, right, 7 is the romantic number. And thus, you have the 7th day of the 7th lunar month on the lunar cycle, which is the festival that celebrates this. And the Evenki, which is the Siberian tribe, which we've talked about before in the course, the idea of the world pillar or the cosmic tree, which would have to inspire Yggdrasil, I would think, has a middle, lower, and upper section. This world tree or this, I don't want to get into explaining that, but this tree that is in 3 parts has 7 marks at 7 places. So we can see by this observation that by the event, this signification of 7 could go all the way back to the universal animism before any civilization. 7 could have been following us all the way back to Bunga Bunga. And in which case, when it comes to naming shamans in different Siberian traditions, there are names for the 7-marked man or the 7-storied one. And this is an homage to the tree. If the shaman is Ilum, then the shaman is like the tree. The belief in the universe and the systems therein by the shamanic rites and by the Siberian traditions are always by these 3 numbers: 3, 7, and 9, which are all odd numbers. Curious. I dig that. 8. 8 in Babylonian myth had its significance as the 8th realm. Although there were 7 spheres, there was also the greater Empyrean, the cosmos beyond the planets, and this was 8. And 8 was the number used to signify paradise. In Islam, there are 7 hells, but 8 paradises. So you can see how Islam is more affected, is its own changes based off its own historical, religious, and cultural past before the Abrahamic got infused. Anyway, I haven't talked about Islam a lot, so I was really grateful to include Islam more in this investigation. China, 7 is the life of a woman, 8 is the life of a man. So 8 has this significance to man. So women are believed to go through life in 7-year cycles. And that's why they mature sooner, because their maturation cycle is a smaller number than males. And that's why males would mature older, you see? There is also the case of the I Ching, which we talked about in the course before, and the 8 times 8 is the 64 configurations of the I Ching. So there's something to dig into there. 8 is the most sought lucky number in China. It sounds like the word wealth. which means fortune, prosperity, right? And thus you could see, this kind of seeking, right? Whereas I think 6 was good before, 8 is the best. And so when it comes to wanting this in your phone number, wanting this on your address, wanting this on your plane ticket, this is the one. And this showed very strongly when it came to the Beijing Olympics, which was to begin at the 8th second, on the 8th minute, on the 8th hour of the 8th day of the 8th month in August 2008. 8808. Wow. So auspicious. And so accordingly, you'd see companies that try to designate somehow 8 when it includes the Chinese market. And you can find, there's this study that this happened across, where a study of the births of Chinese Californians had a disproportionately high number of births on the 8th, the 18th, and the 28th of the month. Which is like, is that mind over matter? Or was that will? I don't know. Anyway, that shows the power of number. Okay, 9. Which, to keep on the subject of the Chinese, long-lasting, enduring, eternity. 9 represents longevity. So in which case 9 has had an association with governance and with ruling. The Chinese emperor's robes had 9 dragons, and all of his constituents that were ruling below him, the ranks below him, were 9 in total. But 9 isn't favored. 8 is favored, right? 9 is bad in the way that it represents pain. And to contrast that, to mirror that in Christianity, the thing that predicted the Antichrist was the 9th Psalm. In Islamic cosmology, the universe was 9 spheres. So again, this association with the cosmos, and especially the planets, depends on what the culture is designating as the number, right? So what number wears that significance depends on how they define. In the Anglo-Saxon culture, 9, and we saw this with the Celts, we saw this with especially with the Celts, but we also saw it with the Nordic mythology. 9 is so ubiquitous, and it's because it's 3 times 3. So if you want the power of 3 times over, the extra special number is 9. And in the ancient Wales, in the ancient Saxon cultures, 9 was in all manner of folklore and all manner of litigation. Arbitrary things had to be done like 9 times in order to be illegal. And still, I think this is true, still to this day, in Germanic law, the ownership of land ends after the 9th generation has had it. But in idiomatic terms, this is where we get the cat has 9 lives thing. From this trope, the Anglo-Saxon, the Germanic, the Nordic trope of 9. And the cat Sith, which is a whole nother thing. And the expression Cloud 9. What's that, right? That's utopia. Cloud 9 is utopia. He's on Cloud 9. But to contrast that, in Greek mythology, the river Styx has 9 bends in the river. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that disagreements? I mean, before when we were mentioning the event in the Siberians, this 9 trope is a part of the 9 heavens of the cosmic tree, which is so much older than the rest of this. So you could say that the influence of the Siberian moved into the Celtic, Nordic, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon trope of 9. And this symbolism that came with 9, the 9 heavens, God, that's something to look into. And this quote, why was it 9 to them, and why did it also bleed into the Mesopotamian uses of 9, is because the 3 exists in the vertical and the horizontal spheres. Right? 3 times over. I don't know, man. I don't know. But anyway, we go to 10. And 10 is the interval of which everything is used, right? 10. Fingers on the hands. 10 toes. We count in tens. By hundreds, by thousands, right? It's all 10. It's all based on 10. And the reason why is your hands, man. It's perfection. It's viewed as perfection and completeness. And of course it is, right? How self-seeking. I mean, what else would it be, though? The decimal system is linchpinned on 10, right? When we count in tens. And it happens differently in different languages, but, I say 700, right? 700, as it still goes back to the 100, as it goes back to the 10, as it all rounds out to 10. It's the basis of the system. And the only thing that would contrast that is the binary, which is, what the computers use, and that's 0 and 1. And so that's a distinction, but when it comes to the human usage, it's always that. And thus, the 10 Commandments. Why is it 10? Well, gosh, I wonder why. Buddhism also utilized this. There were 5 commandments for the layman, and there were 5 commandments for the monks. This idea, too, then comes with, what does 10 mean? Well, 10 is power. 10 is order. 10 is guidance. Man. Okay, I want to move on from that. A brief mention of 11, because 11 in numerological, which I haven't talked about, but in numerological terms is a very spiritual number, which has its own things to look into. There is some medieval negative associations with 11, mostly that it was in the way of error. 11 is the number of error, but it's also interesting to say that, when it comes to the zodiacal understanding, we say everything's 12, right? Baker's dozen. 12 zodiacal signs. However, 1 is always hidden by the sun, right? If the sun is in that sign, then we don't see it. Thus, the ones that we always see are 11, because 1 is eclipsed by the sun. And in the Babylonian Enuma Elish, which you've gone through extensively, Tiamat was supported by 11 monsters. I wonder why. Might that be a zodiacal reference? Many sports teams are comprised of 11 members. Soccer, cricket, football. And in ancient Rome, there were 11 men to the police. 12. Perfection. Yet again, we have a number associated with perfection. And so if it took 3 to get the universe started, it takes 12 also to get the setting just right? And 12 is the perfect fit. And this, I believe, is completely zodiacal. Because it's just how we base time even, right? There are 12 months. There are 12 hours to every day. There are 12 hours to every night, right? The 12 has everything to do with how we have organized time, because the zodiac itself, the physical manifestation of the zodiac, is time, is our metric of time. Thus, all these things that we've used to create the system of time keep homaging 12. 12 is the heavens. The 12 signs are the 12 months and the 12 stations of the moon and the sun in the sky. And depending on what ancient cultures, there was a designation of the 12 northern stars and the 12 southern stars. And the signification of 24 hours in a day is just simply 2 times 12 because there are 2 different times of the day, the dark and the light. It's that, I don't want to go there. The 3 times 4 is the part of this signification. And the 5 plus 7. So the addition of these numbers together is an exponentiation of the significance of those numbers, right? We know about 3, we know about 4, throw them together. Bam, wow. We know about 5 and we know about 7. Throw them together. Bam, wow. And thus, how many apostles? How many disciples did Christ have? Look, crazy. 12 tribes of Israel. Crazy. 12 inches in a foot. The Dewey Decimal System. New Jerusalem. Revelations. 12 gates. Man. In Islam, the Prophet had 12 biological descendants. All right. That's the 1 through 12 thing. I want to kind of rattle through a few honorable mentions, and then we'll close this up. 13. In Hinduism was said, this is a shifty reference, because I did check with a scholar about these Hinduism references, and it is said, but it doesn't seem universally known, so it makes me wonder what sect, but there is signification in meditation with the number 13. However, in Christianity, yet again, 13 is bad simply because of the Last Supper, where the 13th person, being Judas, would betray Jesus. Bad. And you'd think in the place that swallowed up Christianity and was the frontier of Christianization over the Western world, Italy, and beyond, of course, would think that 13 is bad by extension, but actually it's a lucky number in Italy, in particular because it represents St. Anthony. 16 to the Yoruba has great significance. If you look into their written traditions, which, it's a bit hard to get into, but if you can find them, or if you can hear their stories, or if you can dive into their poetry, you will find that 16 is a trope, a numerological linchpin for the Yoruba people. When it came to the previous mention of 13 being good luck in Italy, the bad luck number is 17, because if you spell out 17 in Roman numerals and mix up the letters, it means I have lived, which is something that would be put on gravestones quite regularly. So to come across 17 means death. So in the same sort of way that the language, or the written language in this case, seems to have an association with a number, just like it did with 4 and the Chinese. Thus, we have the unfortunate case of 17 with the Italians. And so we skip the 17th floor in the elevators and the seats in the plane. 18, although not ubiquitous, and again checked with the scholar, is allegedly significant in Hinduism because of the fact that there are 18 books in the Mahabharata and 18 chapters in the Bhagavad Gita. 18 is especially pertinent, coincidentally, as we've seen many times over, in Judaism. Wow, gematria seems that when it comes to uncovering the code in, say, the Torah, or in, say, the Zohar, 18 is the number for the code. When it comes to understanding the hidden, the cryptic meanings and interpretations of the scripture, 18 is the codex. And the word 18 in gematria means life. Life adds up to the number 18, and thus the multiples of 18 are life-giving number, 36, 54. 40 is no bueno, and that's because of these references to the 40 years in the desert, the 40 days on Mount Sinai, the 40 days and 40 nights that the flood lasted, the fact that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days before he went public, and why Lent is 40 days. Now you notice how I'm like running through these, but I do intend at some point to dive into a lot of these. I've got to explain the why behind many of these, but in this case, I'm just throwing a bunch of pearls out, and we'll see about putting them together in necklaces later, which is a bit clever for me to say because 33 and 99 is significant in Islam because prayer beads have 99 beads because you have 33 times 3. And when you use the prayer beads to pray in ritual, you say 3 phrases, each 33 times, which is divine. 3 is divine, 33 is divine, 99. There's a lot of 3s in it. And in Sanskrit, in Hinduism, the idea of the human, the word for tooth, is related to the idea of 32. 32 teeth. And so comes this next leap that the devas are the 33. So if humanity is limited to the number 32, the devas, the gods, are 33. Which could be the origin point for why 33 is significant throughout Western culture. We also saw that the sun is born in the day of past the winter solstice at the 33rd degree in the sky. So that's another... gosh. When it comes to prayer beads, again, if we look back at Hinduism, there it's 108, and 108 is the big deal. If you recite with the prayer beads, you do this 100 times. In certain ceremonies, you also circle around 108 times. There are 108 journeys to the human soul in some traditions. Each of these things I'm saying are in some traditions. Some traditions say that that you becoming enlightened is by use of only 108 breaths a day. If you can manage to do so, right? 108 as a number is very well divisible, has a great number of associations in geometry and pattern, semi-perfect number, hyperfactual of 3. Anyway. Both 9 and 12 have been said to have had spiritual significance as we've moved through, right? The 3 times 3 equals 9. The different cases of 9 being the celestial heavens. Then you have 12, the zodiacos, right? The extension of the zodiac. 9 times 12 is 108. And so thus the sacred sites to seek, especially if you are following Shakti, are 108. There are 108 places to meet with the different parts of the deity's body. And accordingly, if you look at the alphabet in Sanskrit, then you will see that there are 58 letters. But each of those letters has a masculine and a feminine energy. 54 times 2 equals 108. And in a common expression that if you want to make something significant, you'll say, this thing, 108, which is like a way of designating it, a way of making it great. That is a common saying, not just a niche saying, but a common saying in Sanskrit. Okay, there I want to be done. Other than just to say that this is the 66th session. And, the 666 I couldn't find much on. I'm gonna look it more into it later. That was my initial inspiration, but I wasn't happy with what I was uncovering, other than just to say that it really just boils down to one verse in Revelations. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 636. And so that alone was it. And we'll dive more into it in the future. Just to say though that the Chinese think that the number 666 is very very good fortune. So what say us about all this? Well, for one, I just want to speak plainly and say that this is mind-boggling for me. I became frustrated in this process because it became more about contrasting all this and putting all this material together and not doing anything too specific with it, because I feel like these are all things that can be better explained in time as we move through different subjects. Um, I am very grateful for some of the things that I got to unveil during all this, and I'm also very grateful for the different traditions that I got to weave through all of this. But there is something summative to say that there's a great level of projection that can be put into number. And it deserves lip service again. The level of involvement that number has in our day-to-day life is just, it's absolutely not just extensive, it's overwhelming. And so as I was studying this, I was tripping about all these places I was seeing number. There are the cases of synchronicity, of which certain numbers tend to follow you, and they start acting like totemistic animal experiences, right? And for some reason, I think people just have an innate kind of liking. It's almost subliminal to an attraction to certain numbers. I mean, and I think it says a lot about them, right? So I just want to say that a lot of this makes sense in the way that culture is going to bring meaning to everything. We are going to bring meaning to everything. And these things are going to be disagreeant because there are different lived experiences. Duh. But still yet, like, for as long as we've had number, it's amazed us. And it's made us fearful. And it's made us associative. But this is just the beginning. So I hope you enjoy it.